Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Homa. I'm the co-director of OSS Lab, Online and AI Safety. And I'm an assistant professor at UCLA. And sorry, I'm a little, fuzzy, but like direct flight from LA. So sorry if I just interrupt and serve, but that's all. Anyway, and then postponing it for the next slide would make it even worse. So I will just try to go with what we have right now. So for this lecture, I was excited to talk about a study of recommendation algorithm when we are thinking also at the same time, what is the role of human in terms of the harm that we are observing. Okay. So what we'll talk about is like, what are the complexity around the study of socio-technical system? And then after working for about a decade, the idea that I have been following is first of all, we need to look at the prevalence of these problems, and then it would be the cause, where actually when we look at the evidence and what is happening in the researcher scholar, we kind of mix, like we are seeing the mix that so many times we actually bypass this two-step. And then when we observe the harm, we jump into conclusion as and policy making and thinking about what should change without truly studying the first two steps, or at least these two steps. And then we talk about auditing platform and a case study that we have through observational data, and another case study, which is a follow-up of the first study, how we can learn from pure observational data into thinking of auditing platforms through agents and supplements. And then at the end, now after learning about these two studies, we see how we can think of what is it that we need to actually fix.
Give examples of cases where people can bypass those two steps and then make policy for something that doesn't exist.
So the policy making a lot of times. So we just finished the perspective piece that will be out from Nature Computational Science in about a month or two. We just received the minor revision phase. And then, we have more details of examples how when we are hearing about all the harm that is happening in the online space, then there is a jump into, oh, you know what, we need to fix something is wrong. But it's not on top of my head, it's right. So I think I don't need to have a lot of, spending a lot of time here for this audience, as recommendation algorithms are everywhere, and they are the central to the functioning of socio-technical platform, and mostly why they are trying to enhance user experience, but at the same time, by ranking and sorting what the user will see and how they can interact with the item in the online space, they are actually shaping the behavior of millions and billions of users. So what is the problem? The problem is that but at the same time, there are social complications from these algorithms, but also we cannot imagine a world without them, right? We are dealing with tons of information out there, so we need some sort of curation algorithm. And as widespread this algorithm has become across many different use cases, from dating to financial decision-making to education, and all day-to-day life decisions that we make, what is making them kind of the center of attention is the complexity and opacity that we don't understand fully how they are making these decisions. So it's basically for both the users and policymakers and researcher scholars to fully understand how they are actually coming to these end decisions when they are deployed in the society. But what we are seeing, and the voice which has been louder, I can say, is accusation of platforms as the sole role of amplifying all this problematic content. So we know that this problem exists, but what is for me actually a little bit more concerning is that we hear more about one side of this story, where there has been more focus on the harm is happening from algorithm and AI compared to what other factors can actually be contributing. we hear about political concerns, how like they have been amplifying misinformation during 2016 election, how they are radicalizing, as YouTube was labeled as one of the most powerful radicalizing engine of the century. And in my second talk, I will talk about there are so many other mediums that we receive information through them, where you compare actually the consumption that's going to the users, for example, through TV, through fraction of users who are receiving news from something like YouTube, you can see that it cannot be the most powerful engine in radicalizing users. Or at the same time, it goes beyond politics. We hear a lot about well-being, about harming teenagers, how they are platforms are promoting hate speech. Or Google search engine has been actually showing bias toward different race or gender stereotype. Well, in fact, it's not to say that these are not happening. So algorithm, what they are trying to do through the way that they have been designed, they have been optimized to, increase engagement, or like just thinking about watch time, click-through rate, to show the users or rank for the users item that they deem to be more interesting for them. But at the same time, through this objective function, they are coming with problematic behavior of like either showing problematic content to the user, or the content itself is not problematic, but through somehow like narrowing down the user's point of view, or showing, let's say, too many of content which are appearance related to eating disorder or depression, which maybe solely like watching one or two is not a problem, but just your feed is full of this content can also be the problem. So yes, we see these problems are happening, and then it's through the design of these platforms, and then it can be either the content is completely harmful, or it can be that the content is benign, but through some sort of narrowing down your perspective, they can harm the users. And then that makes all of this headline that we see true, and they are warning alarm, we need to pay attention. But at the same time, what is worrying is thinking of these examples and anecdotes and suddenly jumping into generalization as like, oh, we saw that there was one guy who went to the YouTube and watched a lot of the content, so suddenly YouTube is right-wing and YouTube is the greatest radicalizing engine. And then, interestingly, after that, we hear a lot of oversimplification, meaning as if we are seeing there's one person who brings us a story as talking about, I have been radicalized, we just start talking about, oh, you know what, platform, algorithm. There are many different sources that can cause one person to observe the content that they are dealing with. And then it comes that as much as possible that it is actually the algorithm. It can be simply that the platform is a library of content and is hosting the content, and can be more of the problem of supply and demand. As how we come to these headlines and this conclusion is mostly by looking at the society through the lens of these platforms. So we look at the number of views and number of likes in social media, and the conclusion that we came to is that there's millions and billions of views for these headlines, for this video. And then we come to the conclusion that, okay, so perhaps it's the algorithm, but basically what we are here observing is actually confounded with both of these. So it's the influence of both the platform features and also the society and individuals. So that's what makes understanding the impact of socio-technical system complicated, because when we are looking or observing what is happening, we are not sure. Is it because that everybody is interested in right-wing content, so they just simply go to YouTube to watch that content? Or is it that I am going there to watch purely left-wing content, but all is there is right-wing because recommendation algorithm only likes to only promote those, or maybe there's no content. So it can be demand, it can be supply, or it can be the algorithm. And then it comes as, okay, so what we are observing, which one is the driver? Is it the algorithm or is it the user? Because users are definitely not without agency. So what we are, even though when you are going to platform, you are seeing some sort of recommendation item, but what we see is that a lot of the items have been recommended because of some user-initiated behavior. You subscribe to a channel, you search for something, you start showing more or less engagement. So that's the role or agency that user bring to the platform. And then from there, the platform tries to learn that and actually recommend more and more. So kind of is like, as these algorithms have been deployed, this interaction is like actually causing these emergent behaviors. And then what we are trying to do is that so far there have been many studies which have been grounded based on hypothetical scenarios as, okay, the recommendation algorithms optimize for engagement. So then we go to the simulation board and then we assume that if a user watch more and more of this content, then after 10 steps, then the observation or like the content that this user will be exposed to will narrow down or it will be amplified. And then you will receive more and more extreme content. But a lot of the studies have been based on these hypothetical scenarios that if you go to this platform, if you click on 200 far right videos, and then after that, if you continue watching them all for hours, then this thing will happen. When in reality, when we look at the consumption data of 500,000 users from a panel of US, like US Nielsen, that's a participant, what we are seeing is that you cannot find a user who act like that. So their consumption of people is very heterogeneous, and that's what's causing that this behavior that many times through experiments, which are not based on real user data, the behavior that we observe, yeah, it doesn't happen because there is no user who acts like that. So that's why what we are thinking is that if we want to truly understand in the real world what is the impact of the platforms, what we need is actually more of empirical evidence into understanding how there is this interplay between algorithm and user causing this problem. Basically,
so it's just to understand kind of what the overall argument is. It's like about assigning responsibility, or it's about understanding quantum mechanisms through which algorithms.
So that's basically the argument. So what we are saying is that basically the literature is filled with just looking at algorithm as the cause, or like whatever behavior that we see, we jump into testing the algorithm. We just say, perhaps if I have this synthetic scenario and if I test the algorithm, this is the role of algorithm, which a lot of the times there can be other causes, such as like how users are trying to interact.
Is there a conclusion then that that perspective gives a kind of wrong causal statement because it would happen without the algorithm?
It can be that the user, it can be that the user, so that's a problem. So if you purely think it's algorithm, then it's an easy problem, right? Just change the algorithm, change the ranking, and like do something about content moderation. But if it's actually the user who is seeking that content, you need to fix the user. That comes into all the study of persuasion and how we can have it. People don't look for harmful or don't look for extreme content. So that's why we are thinking that like first you need to understand in this interaction to what extent each one of the components have a role, and then start thinking, okay, based on this role, we need to divide our resources. Instead of allocating all the resource for fixing the algorithm or the platform owner, there's this other part that you need to think, should I fix the society? Should I fix the individuals into the content that they are selecting to watch? And so that's the thing that we are hearing, all these problems that are happening. First, we need to understand the scale. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so just trying to clarify the counterfactual. So there could be like at the minimum, that would be two counterfactuals, which is like, so status quo is like a particular type of recommender system that you for these platforms. Then so a fix could be that, okay, we change something about the objective function of the algorithm.
Yes.
Or there's the societal aspect to it, which is that maybe we don't want the individual on the platform.
We don't want, we want, what is it that says like, it's more of for the educated side. You need to educate the individual that you should not just, you should be aware of the content that you choose. It does like just the fact that there's millions of extreme content, it doesn't mean that like it's the fault of algorithm that is recommending them to you more and more if you are looking for it. So there is like a response, or we can say that like this is the user's choice.
Right.
So the user, because I think to me the story, the narrative has been that like the platform is harming everybody, is harming our democracy, but there has been less talking about like why people are choosing this content and how we can fix people and how we can have people to be more aware of the content they receive and then have better decision making into like the information.
So again, to clarify, do you believe that something has changed with the introduction to the platforms relative to what happened before?
So you have this, you're talking with this assumption that there was something wrong and now it's better.
I'm just asking, like, I guess again to this question, what's the counterfactual? Like, would you argue that the platforms actually have changed something about the content that people see? Because if it's just a story or it's just all about the users, then it doesn't really make a difference if there's not.
I think to me it's definitely both. It's the whole point is like that it's definitely both. It's not that somebody is sitting behind these algorithms and changing the knob to make sure that like they are shifting left or right to be recommended more. That's the nature of algorithm, thinking about optimizing for what user is engaged with. And then I think you had a piece into right with John Kleinberg that like it's not what user wants, we should optimize for it. Maybe that's if I'm getting the message right. So the point is like that the platforms are optimizing for engagement because they think this is what the user wants. So if I want to
That's what sells ads.
yeah, but yes, true. Like as I haven't studied like the ads ever, but is the point of like what user is clicking on is like more of like a momentary decision making compared to like what users actually maybe are interested in. It's not the same thing. I think like there was a study, I don't know like that, I don't remember the name of the study, is like that asking people what they want at a time and then having them in the platform and then they choose the news content. These are two different things. And that's kind of in the support of like what you are seeing in the ranking at the moment. You just click, maybe I just go to watch educational or NBC. Suddenly I see this clickbaity content and then I just click. And then the algorithm going with this assumption that like, oh, like you click on this is what you want. I keep pushing you more and more toward. That would be the fault of the algorithm, which is optimizing for something that maybe it's not truly. But the fact that algorithm is picking the item that's are more extreme or pushing people toward those, I think that's a little off narrative. But the other side was like when I was looking into the literature, I couldn't see through the observational data, I could see it seems like there's a lot of signals that there's a user preference. And I wonder like why is the reason that when we are talking about this harm or there's a lot of far-right content that has been recommended, why we never talked about the fact that it's a role or contribution of the user agency. And then again, like here, what it helps is like that to me is like there's a lot of effort and it's just a matter of the effort. If we think that this is too much of a big problem, similar to the studies of fake news is very small, it's very different into how much effort needs to go here compared to the fact that biased information, which is not fake, that has much bigger impact. So if we just hear factual information, but that fact is just like one-sided, the harm is bigger than fake. So that's another example of like how much of our attention is going to one part of the problem and forgetting that how factual content can be misused through selection bias. So for the rest of the talk, I will just bring two case studies as examples of how actually like how we can go how we can go through this trajectory, first looking at the scale and then see how far we can go into understanding the cause. And then it will help us to think that, okay, which part I can actually fix. And then I found this interesting because when I started looking observational data, my assumption was like that there's just so far that I can learn about observational data, how far I can learn about observational data rather than just description of like, this is what people saw compared to what was the role of user versus algorithm. So here, one problem starting from top was like, okay, like that we just want to make sure that like when public are receiving this information, which is kind of like selected by the media, that should, like match what we are saying. Actually, yes, thank you. And so yeah, this study is a little old, but at the time when I was looking as okay, what people have done in terms of like why we are getting into these contradicting conclusion, because there was one study would come and say, hey, you know what? Yes, the platform is actively pushing you to our far right. The next one would come as like, oh, you know what? This is the gateway. We found the problem. There's this specific content producer. And then the other study would come and say, hey, you know what? A large fraction of users are actually consuming this content. Each one of them had different problems. For example, some of the studies have been relying only on platform API. So platform API doesn't have any notion of interaction and user agency. So you just search for something, and then there's just pure algorithmic ranking. There's no personalization. So all the finding here was basically how the pure algorithm would work. Some studies have been looking at the trajectory of the users, but again, real world complication when you have access to the public data is that people watch something from across the globe. You don't know, like if it's me watching something a million times, it's a million user. So that's the other problem, that like we don't leave the trajectory of what we are viewing. So researchers turned into the commenting behavior as into being able to follow the users on YouTube, which like who are the users that actually leaving comment is a very different population into users who are watching. So basically, what are the trajectory that you find here maybe belong to a specific characteristic or group of users. And the other thing that was a little biased for me about these studies was like that the studies have been looking into like, oh, there's this fraction of users who are watching Joe Rogan, and then 5% actually shift from there into commenting for far-right videos. So Joe Rogan is the gateway for people to find far-right videos. When we look at this study, we actually look back from what fraction of users have been leaving trajectory today for far-right content, and a month later into Joe Rogan. And then we could see a bigger fraction. So then it would be, is actually far-right acting as a gateway for moderating the users, if you want to go with this conclusion that, oh, you were here at Joe Rogan, now like it has been radicalizing you, but far-right is moderating you and pushing you back to watch more moderate content.
Sorry, I'm just going in the spirit of this.
No, that's perfect.
Yeah.
No.
So you're talking about YouTube here, but there are studies about on Meta, and also like on X, right, using the Chrome browser extension, and like for the Meta studies, they don't really find much when they change the algorithm to like it's like reverse chronological versus personalized. And on Twitter, they or X, they find something about when you introduce personalization. So, and you're talking about YouTube.
Yes. And then
Should I think of this as an addition, an important additional piece as part of this larger picture, or is YouTube?
Okay. It's the most important of all this.
Or is YouTube like different?
I think that's the point, that like even YouTube desktop, I am very careful to generalizing to YouTube short.
Sure. Yeah.
Yes. So I think the YouTube short and the TikTok short, like you cannot just generalize if TikTok is acting like this. The whole short video content is a new era of what are different harms. A few studies have shown that people have been interacting with text-based, they have been interacting with long YouTube videos, and then a group has been interacting with short video format. And then they have been, like through a training before being exposed, and then they have been, asked some question after being exposed to these different platforms. And they found that the group which has been watching short video had the most impacts of like forgetting the training. Into like there's a lot going on into what is the impact of short video, again beyond the politics. So it's a very different ecosystem that I think is less explored. I think I'm just bringing this as a example of like how first we hear about all the issues and the roles and the contributing factors, and then when we look, what are the things that we learn differently through just observing the data. And then like I think my problem with this type of a study was like that we are saying that like 1% of the population are watching extreme right, but then we are claiming that based on 2,000 users. And then when I was reviewing such papers, I was like, this is just 5 video as an examples of generalizing that to billions of videos. And then we take that 5 video and then divide it with like 1,000 and say, oh, you know what, like this is a fraction. So it's just, I don't know like how much, significant are they finding, but they were even actually the greatest studies because yeah, you cannot, as independent researchers, find a lot of volunteers from extreme right to just donate their, or like give you their data. So, and then the point is that these are the best, not that like there's, but this is about like the challenge of like, if you really want to understand through real world data and observing how people are interacting with the platform rather than purely studying each other. And again, like getting more into the data is like, okay, what is anyway, how do you measure? And I think that that's still a big bottleneck as how do you measure what is center, what is left, what is extreme. I'm not super proud of this. So in the literature, there has been 2 approaches for measuring source space or source level and content level. I'm still not sure that like content level is better than source level because after many years of trying to measure if this content is extreme, is harmful, or is right or left, we can see that still there's not much of agreement even between people compared to like now let's say that we want an algorithm to estimate that. So here for this study, we went channel level as like each channel can belong to left, right. And through a study, we put anti-woke into far right for many reasons. And then we posted on archive and then they emailed us like a million emails that like that, I'm not this person, I'm not far right, I'm not far right. I don't belong to the right wing. And then they ask us to just, leave them as their own group. So we just take out anti-woke and then we say from far left to far right. And then there's this group of anti-woke.
That more like libertarian?
I think like a group like which are against like they are more of like anti-establishment.
Right.
Yeah, but they like when you actually look at their interviews, they are like they claim that they are from center, from left, and from right. So it's actually distributed. What we observe from the data is that their audience is all coming from right. So that's why if you think audience space, as many of the classification is audience space, you would assume that they should belong to right. But that was interesting to see, like, and then a lot of the behavior going to this group is very similar to right-wing content. Okay, what else? So, and since this is not a pure like talk and like a little bit of like a workshop, complications that like, okay, we had early trajectory of the users from a third-party company, and then it was expanding for each individual 6 months to 2 years, but it was like a URL from a video ID.
So it's not provided by YouTube, you got it from a third party.
Yeah, so it was basically everything that you do on your desktop, on your Chrome, or like any browser, and then there's a URL, and then we had everything. It's not just.
But there's no mobile phone watching.
Sorry?
There's no mobile phone watching here.
Yes, there's no mobile phone, it's just desktop. And now we are expanding to mobile and this and tablet and like, yes, it's just growing. Yeah. So this, okay, so we have the URL and then we extract the video IDs and then say, okay, that's easy. and then we get the channel ID, and then we just go search for Reuters, and then we see, okay, Reuters belong left or right. And then we go to all the previous studies. There are 3 different studies, and then we just say, okay, majority vote from these previous studies, however they collect their annotation, and then we come up with one label. But what happened suddenly is we realized that as the data was going back for up to 5 years, for 20% of the videos, basically we didn't have any, the video didn't exist anymore. Meaning that like through API, we couldn't find them, and the meaning that we couldn't find who produced them, what was actually there. So you could just jump into this conclusion that perhaps they have been problematic. Should I put them in one group of harmful content? And is it through content?
Yeah, we put a platform or by the video creators.
Yes. So it could be any of those. It could be that someone made it private, so the video exists, but it's not private. Or it has been private because we're just observing what they watch, but we didn't know if it's private or not. So we had 2 things to do here. One was that if you just go with the web scraping, you could see the error message. It would say it's copyright, it's like harmful content, it's private, the content doesn't exist anymore, the channel producer has been banned. So you could get like the reasoning. And still, it wouldn't tell us much as like that what is actually the content in terms of the political group. So what we did here was we just reached out to all the studies, all the research scholars who had studied YouTube at the time. And then maybe like 2 years ago, somebody did a study, and then we asked them to share all the video ID, channel ID, and the transcript that they have collected. So here, based on like about 5 studies, they shared their data, and then we could design a classifier because we could see that like all the content which had been removed, we could just go back and watch the user characteristics. And based on what the user has been consuming, we just did the estimate of like what would be the content then. And then we find that a very small fraction of this 20% is actual. And then for
cross-validated with videos that you actually still have.
Sorry?
Could you like cross-check that procedure with videos that you still have?
We did, because some of them, they existed, actually like some of the video existed in Wayback Machine. So we could actually have a ground truth as like, okay. And then yes, it was like some of the videos existed in the previous study. So yeah, it could kind of check that like what is happening. And then what we did was from this point, the Nielsen data kept coming. So we started collecting the video IDs and the channel ID, basically with 2 months delay. And then we could see that the missingness will drop to 5%. And then the other part that we also didn't drop, and then we said there would be a lot of use for non-YouTube videos as like how we can learn about these users beyond the platform. So that's mainly the point for this study, as like this is what users do on YouTube, but what they are doing outside the YouTube. So we just get all the news here, extract the domain, use the previous study, and just assign a category label to the non-news, non-YouTube news videos. And then, so what we were trying to do is like kind of like going back to this story as like if someone is watching a lot, and then toward the end, as you say, hours and hours on YouTube, something shifts, something happens, and then you start watching more, like low quality content. So to create these sessions, we just break the sessions or the trajectories every time that more than a threshold, there was no YouTube activity. And then we didn't go as like, this was the other behavior that we observed. Users just don't go to YouTube and watch back to back, like 10 videos. Actually, like the median has been something about 4 or 5. And between videos, we see that there's a lot of switch. People just go to their Gmail and then they just watch news, and then they just go to text-based news. So anyway, so it doesn't seem right to just break up the sessions if it was just consecutive video watching. So we just said it here consecutive. And then now we just go to the scale. And then the question is, what is your definition of a scale? As how many users are watching far-right content, how many videos belong to far-right videos, or like how many minutes. So we look at all of them, but here let's just look at like how many users are engaged with different categories, and then after that, how engaged are these users. So first we just get each user, and then per month, we just take this user, we just take their video consumption, we just put them into buckets from far left to far right, and then we say, during this month, you watched how many minutes of this content. And again, we have anti-woke, and then we just cluster them, and then we look at the cluster centroid, and then we see there's a unimodal consumption among these users, that they get the majority of the content from one type. And then we say, okay, there's a member for each of these communities. So you are a member of one of these communities if you are news consumer. And then we just see as like what percentage of YouTube users belong to each of these communities per month. And there's like whole confidence interval and everything, which is just the visualization that it does not show it here. And then what we find is that these are the lines which have been fit, but yes, there's dots per month. And then what we see is that like this is far right, and during this 4-year period, we don't see that it's increasing, but they exist. They are not the biggest. This is left, and this is anti-woke. So the anti-woke group is like that. It's just getting more and more community members.
When did Trump launch his platforms?
Sorry.
When did Trump launch his Truth Social?
I'm not sure.
So it must have been during this time period, right?
What was the event?
When Donald Trump started his own social media platform.
Donald Trump started here, right? Like here?
That's when he was elected, but when
Truth Social.
Oh, Truth Social.
After he was banned or no? No.
he was banned from Twitter, no?
Yeah.
Yes, that has to be 2020.
Yeah, I don't think that we have Truth Social here. Yeah. I think somewhere here there was a peak. Yeah. But overall trend over these years, we couldn't see that like it's growing in terms of number of users. First, we had these two groups together, and then we assumed that like, yeah, far-right consumption is growing, and then we realized that the category who is absorbing, or the group who is absorbing more consumers is basically anti-woke. But then we shifted to, yeah, this one is supposed to be like this one. So when we switched to median watch time, as like this is very skewed, if you just go with the mean, it's like 3 times bigger, but looking at the member of these communities, and then we see like an average user has this much consumption per month, we actually found that yes, the far right users are way more engaged compared to left and right. Yes.
But if I'm understanding the scale on the left graph, something like 98% of users are not in any of these political groups.
Because I think about first, like imagine that is around 1,000 channels. Second is just news. So the majority of YouTube users are not news consumers. So YouTube is not the biggest source of news. And people just go to YouTube to get the news.
Well, but I guess what I'm pushing back on is it might be, as you say, that the 98% of people who are not getting their news from YouTube are getting news somewhere else and subscribe to one of these political ideologies. On the other hand, they might just be people who like to watch cat videos and don't care about politics, right? And I feel like there's sort of, if that's the story, if it's people like cat videos, only 2% of people care about politics, that's a very different interpretation. Compared to this group is representative of other people who are getting their news in a different way, right? Like when we say the anti-woke people tripled from 0.1% to, or doubled from 0.1% to 0.2%. If I think that that is actually reflective of them moving from 10 to 20% of the population. Because this is just a selected sample that's representative, that's a huge social thing. If I think that literally it is 0.1% to 0.2% of the population, and everyone else doesn't care, that's a very different kind of story.
I think this is, you can think of this as a representative sample of US viewers of YouTube, right? So you just say that like, you just look at all the YouTube users from US, and then you just normalize that to just like, okay, we have 10,000 or like 100,000, 100 million YouTube viewers this month, and 100 million users went to YouTube and then opened their YouTube browser. And from this population, 1% watched left videos. That's how you can interpret this.
That makes me mostly.
But it's a small.
Doesn't matter. Like 1% out of 1,000 watched these crazy videos for a while.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and then what is? I think that's my point, and then that's why in my talk in Wednesday we are saying that we are just, this is it, right? And the point is like, then you go to TV and then you see there's a huge population of Americans who are getting their news from TV, and then you see all similar level harmful content that is coming from cable news. And then at first we were like that, are they comparable? And then we just have, so when I was looking at news consumption, I could see this. And then I just made the scale with TV, like at the same scale. And then suddenly this was TV, this was YouTube. And then, it looked to me that like it's just too small when you make the scale the same. So yes, I wouldn't say that, this scale, it just goes to 0.8% of YouTube users. But this is when you measure compared to the headline that like the greatest radicalizer of the century. I think that's what I saw, there. But YouTube is about 8% use consumer.
But based on your framework, can you draw the conclusion between YouTube views and TV views, just because it's a completely different population? Because you started out saying that what you are showing us is like a representative sample of news consumption on TV.
But it's just a desktop user in US. So they are both representative sample of US consumers. One is their desktop, one is their TV.
Right, but you don't know if they're the same type of, it's not the same, right? Because there's selection into different channels. So like, for example, that argument would make, you could take that argument to that logical conclusion if you've basically taken the same set of users and randomly assigned them to TV versus YouTube. But people are potentially selecting the different channels. That's a question for you. I don't know.
So yes, we have overlap. We have a small fraction of users that there's overlap. And then when we look at those users, we could see that even for users who we could observe across both platforms, they were getting way more views on TV. We compared web and TV as well. And then, I tried for a long time to compare YouTube and web and TV, following the same user, assuming that they are dropping from Fox News and they are going to get Fox News on YouTube. But the scale was too small that it's just nonsense, and it just dropped.
Do you have any sense of the reverse probability question? Like, say, what share of far-right activists get the news from YouTube or things like that?
I think that means like that you should find that user across all the platforms and then see what fraction of their content they are getting from YouTube. But it depends. Like we have like a small sample that we follow them on web and YouTube and desktop and mobile, but maybe like a few thousand. So it just start from like a million users at the end, maybe just have oversample.
I guess what I meant to say is like this, right? I know you have like 0.1% like far right video watchers here. But like maybe among the people who go to neo-Nazi rallies, pretty large fraction of them could be watching YouTube videos because the overall share of neo-Nazi rallies is small, right?
So like, if you want to think of user level, so let's just say this study is just talking about like, we see millions and millions of viewership of the extreme video. And then we think that like, yes, like everybody in US has been radicalized. And then we just see that if you just look at the representative sample, this fraction are watching. And then yes, viewership to YouTube comes from all over the board. And then you don't know, like maybe just people from Iran are watching extreme video, right? Just my own country. So it's just, so you just don't know like where does this viewership come from. In terms of following one user, we did a study that we just try to follow like users and then see what they are getting across different platforms. And then the point of the study was like that, the efficacy of like this policy making. And then for that platform, we followed them before the time that Parler was shut down. They were heavy consumers of Parler, which had conspiracy and far-right content. And then here we just followed at the user level everywhere. And that could be interpreted, okay, these are far-right consumers. These are people who watch a lot of far-right. And then we just followed them everywhere across multiple platforms. And then at the time, Parler was shut down and suddenly they couldn't get their 10-minute news from Parler. And then we wanted to know that if shutting down one platform is a good solution, and then these users per day will have 10 minutes less of problematic or similar content. And then what we observe is like when we actually follow the same user, we couldn't see any change in the total watch time because now the consumption of other fringe platform increased. So then we were like, that's another story that just was telling me this is a user. You just shut down the whole platform and then I would just go get it from offline board. I just find it somewhere. If I am looking for something, I will find it. So that can be the closest study for us to like following a user who is heavy consumers everywhere.
You can look at the content on YouTube versus media, right? So in some sense, even if less people are engaging with content on YouTube, perhaps it's more extreme, but the media regulations and so TV news cannot be that extreme.
It cannot be that extreme, but there's a lot of harm that can go because to me, just let's say again, going back to the same story, I look at like vaccine narrative and then on Fox News, and then I could see that like is like 15 times more saying that 2 people died. Mask doesn't work. So if you just imagine that, like, because we trust more and then we just hearing that, okay, masking doesn't work, distancing doesn't work, vaccination doesn't work, it can also come with a lot of consequences. So that's the balance of like, yeah, smaller fraction, maybe they just invade like White House or blah, blah, but also at the same time, having like millions of users who don't follow a policy that also come with the consequence of killing a lot of. And then like you say like Fox News also like is here, yeah, but the scale is very different compared to Fox News consumers. And then is again different narrative, polarization or radicalization. I think here far right it's more of like radicalization, and then segregation on TV may be more related to polarization, as many people are just thinking of the world around them differently. And I should say that we don't answer everything. We just want to say like it just shed light into some different perspective compared to what we have been thinking before. Here I was like obsessed with, okay, is it true that like 2 same users, they had like same watching history, and then one of them saw like 1 far right video, the other one watched like 5 far right video, and then in future their consumption has shifted differently. And then I would imagine that, okay, then everybody's through that young man who just watched accidentally more videos. And then from there, that person was recommended a lot of those videos. And that's true that people are being radicalized on YouTube. So this is observational, right? So I cannot have these 2 groups and assign this one to one group, assign this to the other group. I could just say that this person watched this selective, intentionally, autoplay, whatever, and then this person in future watched more. So it's like more like a prediction. If you watched 5, then I can predict in future you are watching more. And then what was the point of this study for like this analysis for me was like when I was actually looking here, I was like that, is this the same person who is watching more over time? Or is it like that I watch 10 minutes and then the next person comes next year and is watching 20 minutes? And then what I found was that, yeah, again, for same user, if you follow them for anti-woke and far right, if they are watching more, then in future they are watching way more compared to more like left or right wing content. So maybe it's a little, yeah, like addictive.
Is there a sense in which maybe the algorithm is learning about these different elasticities? Like, suppose, I don't know that this is true, but suppose that the anti-woke people, if shown another anti-woke video, are likely to consume it. Whereas the moderate people, if shown another moderate video, are not likely to consume it. They want to go to the cats, right? If the algorithm picks up this, they will provide the cats to the moderate people and more anti-woke videos to the anti-woke people. And so what you're observing can be the consequence of an algorithm.
Yes.
But it's underlying, what the algorithm is picking up is the underlying difference in the elasticities across the types. So,
but that's the point. That's the point is like algorithm learns from the user and the user is observed, is exposed to something and then shows more interest. And then this like feedback loop continues forever. So, but still is like that the user has its own agency to like keep selecting. There was another study that published in Nature, and what they had was auditing Google search, and then they had users, and then they just have their like they had a few thousand users, and then they had both the search term and what has been recommended to them in terms of like the top rank item through your Google search. And then it was for news. And then they showed that like when people search for something, there's all different type of center, left, right content. And even though there is like more moderate content, there are many users who go and like intentionally like or like with their own agencies select the more extreme content of the news. So the point was like that even though you search for something, I give you the option, and I don't know like if we can say that there's less polarization, but anyway, as a user, you have been shown a range of partisan content, but they show that the user would just go and try to find the items that they are interested in. So it's a different narrative to say that like personalization made the Google search to just show me out of 9 far right link of the news. Yeah, I think these are just signals that like that you had enough diversity, but what is the expectation as like should the algorithm always hide the highly partisan content?
I don't know how much like material you still want to show us, but like if you go to a high level discussion, right? When there is like I
think I will just continue finish the rest of this in my next talk. Yeah, but maybe for today we can just say, okay, there was this a small group, and then they were highly polarized. They consume more over time. The engagement was way bigger, even though there was a small group. And then we are talking that the scale is not the point. That there's one point that YouTube is posting only right-wing content. I think we said maybe no, there were a lot of left. But then we end up with this question of like, there's a small group of heavy consumers, and as they are getting some like 5 back-to-back videos in future, they get much more of that content compared to left. And then I think we just can end here that is it that actually is radicalizing? YouTube is radicalizing. Because do we think we have enough evidence is actually a question. I think maybe I can stop here that like based on the observation of a study, do we actually see that there's enough evidence that like there are a small group who are getting more far right content, and if we can assign or contribute that to algorithm.
So I mean, I guess there's anecdotal stories, right? But there's a bit also more like argument from first principle where, I mean, there's a few things that are fairly clear about this sector of platforms, which is they're ad financed, right? They are using algorithms to decide what to show to people. The algorithms ultimately have the goal of selling ads. To do that, they have the goal to maximize engagement, and to do that often in a fairly subliminal and quick way. And that clearly does something, right?
I think that the whole engagement, either through like because of there's more ad here, people buy ad for this content, and then the algorithm says there's more ad or user interest. But maybe for now, my question is like that, just based on this observational study that we had, because we could see that there are the group of users who are consuming more and more of the content. And it's at the individual level, and it's after watching a few, they are watching more. And that's like that something is happening, but that's a question of like, is it all autoplay? Is it the ranking of the algorithm that has all of them as top because they are engaging, because there's ad or any other business models? Or is it that we can say that, okay, so what, maybe it's just that I'm the person who's selecting everything through the sidebar, I have two far right, two center, two far left, and it is me who can decide what to choose.
Statistically, that's actually a version of an old question in labor economics, right? Where people are wondering, are the same people, are just some people have a lower chance of finding a job versus others? Or if you're long-term unemployed, does that reduce your chance of finding a job? See what I'm saying? And that's very hard to distinguish statistically.
Yes.
It seems very similar to the question of like, are the same people watching a lot of far right videos? Or it's like watching them making you more likely to watch more in the future?
Yes. Yeah. So I think to me, like at this point, basically, we still don't have any answer as well.
Like I wish this were ready to causally manipulate what filtering algorithm you are exposed to, then you can see that's clean way of getting at that.
I think my whole emphasis here on the role of algorithm is like that if it was just purely the problem of ranking, then that would be easy problem. Because you can list is that like you have in the ranking of like the 10 videos that you're watching, there's just one far right, and there's 9 let's say like moderate news content. And then I think that Nature study was showing that like you had the choice, and then you just went and looked for and clicked for the one that was matching your interest. So then it would be that then if the job of the algorithm is just completely censorship, like completely censoring a specific type of content, is that the solution? Like a stronger censorship, or is like that showing like trying to educate the user, something like that?
How does it interact with like platform policy changes? Because now YouTube tries to deprioritize what they call borderline code. So how does that interact with either the data that you have or the way that you study this problem?
Yeah, that's why I emphasize that like we just learned about. Here we are more focused as like continuing into, okay, what happened in this 4-year period? What was the contribution of the user? And then further as we go, continue with this observational study, we see that like that, what are the signals that like, this is the user and a lot of characteristics of the user across the whole web, similar to the parser. And not the matter of like, okay, this is YouTube, and then something we want to change something about YouTube. So I didn't want to get from this 4-year period into the whole, the whole recommendation algorithm of YouTube over the last 20 years, right?
But there's also, I mean, it's adjacent, but not quite the same question, right? To assign blame, right? Or like apportion somehow what's the user, what's the platform versus asking counterfactual questions. What if you change this about how algorithms operate or how platforms are regulated? What would happen? But it's not quite the same question. The latter seems a little more.
I think the end game is like that, how we can change this ecosystem of consumption or exposure But the question is like that, what should be fixed? And I have seen this from maybe my literature review was limited, but I have been seeing a lot about the algorithm. But to me was like, okay, whatever, like you just wanna down rank. What do you wanna do? You down rank, people will just go and select this. So this study is just trying to find that. So yes, there's a motivation, a business model that need to be changed, but not the ranking and then changing the ranking. I don't think that's the solution. And then we had this debate with some researchers that like, okay, you change the ranking, I'm far right user, and then you just push down the far right content, then I don't like your recommendation algorithm, I don't show up on YouTube anymore. What do you want to do with that? And then there was this science paper from Stanford that's showing that like you just manipulate the ranking a little bit and then the user wouldn't perceive it. People are not that, like aware of what has been recommended to me. Does it 100% match to what I have watched in the last, 6 months? So like, yeah, it doesn't hurt the user interest in engagement with the platform. So these are the side that like it shows that like, yes, platform can do something better, but there are other studies that show that like, yeah, users also will go and find what they are looking for. For that side, we are looking into a study of persuasion. And
So again, the platform has an ultimate material interest to maximize attention.
Yeah.
Criticize it or not, but there will be profit maximizing companies to do that.
Yeah,
Might be by itself the problematic feature of the situation.
I think it's a matter of like they need to change their business model. That's true. But again, it's not just, it will not solve everything that we need to think of.
Super interesting, and maybe I should have made this clearer with Sven had in his previous talks. Like I'm also working on this area, so it's just great to see the conversations about scale versus highly engaged but smaller sort of community. But I was just thinking, the definition of what far right, what is mainstream versus what is not, is also kind of changing.
Oh yes, that's
Right. So it almost seems as if, what gets characterized as far right like 5 or 6 years ago is just like literal mainstream, propaganda now. Right.
yeah. I think that's a big so if I wanted to just go toward the end of this talk, I would say like what are the challenges? I wouldn't say the challenge is just changing the ranking. I would be like, how we are measuring, what are we looking at? Like if we take one platform, how much of the consumption of people we are touching, and then billions of studies on Twitter, and then how many people, and then why we are doing it, because like we don't have access. That's the only platform left with API, or like us with API. So that's one thing that we can do. That's our power. We can just study Twitter, but the whole money, time, and research, how many people are actually getting their whole news from like Twitter. So yeah, I would say like among the difficulties that I found, like measurements is one of the most challenging. And what we are doing right now, I guess you can make a guess, LLM. LLM is just telling us this is far right, this is far left, this is this. So now easy problem is solved. Now we can just go and get the content and just assign a very, very accurate content. And then every time, like LLM perhaps progress over time, which that's whole another, again, problem that I don't think that anybody has shown that actually the measurements with LLM is reliable, rather than just like 200 samples.
It's reliable for what, right? Because these are fundamentally contested notions.
Yeah. I just, so the point is like, just one thing, like we ask people and then the agreement between people is not high. And then we are like, why should we expect that LLM has an agreement with the user? So that's a big challenge. Sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say, there is like an emerging body of statistical methods for social science and an LLM is judged kind of methods to say, well, we can get people to do some fraction of the labels, we can.
From
see if we
Brandon
get a great-
Stewart at Princeton.
There's a few papers that have come out around this. Some of them based around like prediction powered inference methods, some are more traditional statistics.
There are very few studies that they are trying to say, do a careful work, correct for the biases, and then we can use it. And there's a billion works that they just don't validate. They just get GPT, ask, assign a score, and then forget about similar old fashioned problem of topic models, no validation. Oh, this is the selection bias. I think that's happening with LLM.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I've done this for one project, that this get the humans to do 200 labels and then cross-validate and let the LLM do 200,000 labels. It seems like a great strategy. Like but then if you're telling me that the humans don't agree on your labels, then I think there's not maybe an objective fact that you're attempting to label, right? So like
That's my weakness. I don't have any answer what is happening. But yes, that's what we did. We just had a random sample and then we asked users in Prolific to just 5 per article to annotate. And then the scale was from -5 to 5. And then we could see that some articles have been annotated at 0. A lot have been allocated extreme right or left, like -4, -4, -4, -5, 4, 5. And then it was like this whole effect that like somehow people wouldn't allocate much of the score in the middle, or there was more disagreement. So it's like people were like, okay, this is moderate, this is bad, this is good, this is bad. So it was rather than like there's something between Breitbart and AP. And then there was more disagreement between user in this boundary of like a score 2, 3. But yeah, maybe we did a poor job, but yeah, we could see that among the users also there's a lot of disagreement.
And even relatively, talking about different types of LLMs, you would think that like ChatGPT might be different from like Grok or.
Oh yeah, of course we try like Grok,
Yeah.
Quen, like open source, like
Bit by bit, I'm having a hard time thinking about what does LLM based like fact checking or labeling in these contexts might even imply, right? Like this, you can pick your LLM
so.
in line with.
I think these are all easy stuff, right? Have a for loop and then put like 10 LLM and then just look at them. But the second we actually look at what the quality of the annotation from users, we see there's a lot of problem there. If you are, and then of course you collect demographic, because if you are from right wing and then I show you something from right wing, you just say this is moderate, this is factual, this is correct. If you are from left wing, I show you the same thing, you just, oh no, this is extreme. So I think it has a lot more attention or knowledge compared to a random sample, random people, majority vote.
If the issue is that everyone agrees on what the scale looks like, but people disagree on where 0 is on that scale.
I think
Do you find that
pairing,
pairwise comparison.
yeah, pairwise has been, yes, but I don't have the math with, like my brain right now, but yes, pairwise is a solution, but we did the math is like something like, oh, we need to pay 10 times more for the same number, because you just need to compare all the pairs and show all the pairs to people. Definitely if I had enough money, because I can pay like $500 for annotation, but if I could pay 5,000 for the same set, then I would just go pairwise, yes.
Do you need all pairs, or do you just need like n log n?
You just need you just need enough, but it's still, like still much more money for the same sample. I think that's why that I go back to the source level, because I'm like, okay, source level, there's a lot of crowdsourcing, like media bias, fact check, or like all side, or like, there's a little bit like more crowdsourcing at the source level. When like 5 years ago, I was killing myself that like source level is bad, but right now with LLM, I am back, okay, at least with source level, there's some crowdsourcing. I'm not
Still at your rate channels or.
because yeah, like there's a lot of websites that they have, like expert or like human crowdsourcing, and they all agree that like, okay, Fox News is half factual and it belongs in this spectrum like here. And then there's this other news source which is more on the right. So right now I would rather go with like source level and then just purely collecting it from all these existing free sources. But yeah, I think we've tried, but I don't know if you have any solution. Right now I have a paper which is due tonight and then the bottleneck is like that. How can I measure reliably because the quality is really bad? In terms of like human annotation, they don't agree. Even I cannot use them as the ground truth to train a supervised model. So that's the biggest problem.
So how one broad question, since you have been working on these topics and it seems that YouTube is not making a big deal on this, what are your thoughts on what's behind the kind of the increase in the far right of Europe and the US, and maybe it's another sort of platform or another way that they interact, or
And so, and then what is the question for me?
what do you think? It's like it's the order of magnitude of this is small. So where do you think there is other areas that?
Yes, this is super small, as I said.
Yeah.
So, and then we have a study of TV at the same time, and then we could see that like
Yeah.
we first started looking at segregation on the website and the platforms, and then we find that okay, is a small overall. Like if you just go and get all the videos from YouTube, and YouTube has the label news, and then you just see like how many videos are news. You just see like about 8%, and then you just look at, because this one was breakdown to partisanship, but just let's say if you just go with news, you can just get everything. And then we just went into estimating Americans who get news. It was like something between 10 to 12% of Americans are getting some sort of news, let's say like 10 minutes or less on YouTube. Compared to going to TV, you can see that like TV is a very bigger source. I cannot say this is important, this is not important. And then, but what we see for TV on US is like that is a decline over the last 10 years into fraction of Americans who are watching news from broadcast, as the broadcast was considered as like, it's more of like a factual, not partisan content.
Probably also very age segregated now. Retired people watching Fox News versus young guys watching Manosphere videos. Or...
I don't believe, yeah, I'm really not a good podcast scientist. It's like, but, and then what we observed was that following cable, comparing cable on the same time period, we see that cable is stable in terms of number of consumers, but this is broadcast, this is cable. So people are not leaving cable, people are dropping from broadcast. Why? I don't know. And then there was a vibe that like influencers were mimicking hard news producers. And now it's the trend has changed. You can see that Fox News and NBC and all of them are trying to mimic the short video format from influencers. So I think a million things have changed, and I don't know, but I would say like news and radicalization is maybe 10% of my research, and more on like online safety from mental health, harm, harassment, cancer, or health disinformation, or yeah, just so many other things are wrong on the internet. Yeah, so to me, it's just one of the many problems. And yeah, radicalization is just one of many, not the only problem.